For condos, you can't refinance the building because the condo doesn't own the building. Where it's in a co-op, they own the land, the deed. So therefore, the organization can have an underlying mortgage because they own it.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you're enjoying this show, do me one little favor. Help me help you. We want to get a rating and review from you, right? We want to hear your honest feedback on what's working for the show, what you love about the show, but also any critical feedback that can make the show work harder for your investing goals. And listen, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, we've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Tina Larsson. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to KasmanCapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to KasmanCapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Now, Tina Larsson is a powerhouse behind the Folson Group, New York City's premier co-op and condo cost consultant, helping co-op and condo boards and multifamily building owners reduce their expenses. Now, Tina is also the author of Living the High Life, which talks about how smart co-op and condo owners can protect themselves and their investment. Let's welcome to the show, Tina Larsson.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to speaking with you and to your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, listen, it was great to have you on the show. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Okay, I'll be happy to. Filling in the gaps. So I come from a finance background, and I'm sure that everybody can relate to who wants to throw money out the window, right? And that's how I felt, and that's how my husband felt. And we owned a co-op in New York City. So we got some neighbors together. We overthrew the old board with a goal to cut our building's expenses. This was right up my alley as a Swede, because if you've ever been to IKEA, you know what I'm talking about, because we like to live small, simple, and efficient. And with that, using my analytical background from decades in finance, I was able to help the new board save our building $340,000. When I was out networking, as you know, everybody needs another financial advisor, right? Oh, maybe you do.
Everyone needs one, whether or not they want one or actually taking one is a different situation, but everyone should have one.
Yes, but one, not hundreds. So instead of introducing myself as the financial advisor that I was, I introduced myself as I helped my co-op save $340,000. And a lot of people, 25% of New Yorkers, live in a co-op or condo. So they introduced us. They said, "Can I introduce you to my board?" So we started our business. And that is my background in a nutshell.
I love it. First of all, let's play that back, right? You were living in a co-op and did not like what you were seeing. You got together, changed out the board, got on the new board. You were able to help that board save over $340,000 in expenses. And then I love the fact that instead of walking around saying you're a financial advisor, that was kind of your calling card. So when you introduced yourself at different events or meeting other people, you would let them know that you saved your board $340K, which obviously led to more introductions and conversations. You made that point that 25% of New Yorkers are living in kind of a condo or co-op building. So it makes sense that there's a lot of excitement for people to save money on their expenses as opposed to having to pay maybe higher HOA fees or condo association fees. First of all, for some of our folks who are in markets where co-ops and condo associations don't exist. Like we were talking before, I lived in Chicago for 8 years, so I know all about, condo associations. New York or Miami folks probably are very familiar, but, many Midwestern folks or folks out west who have plenty of land and would never consider living in a condo or co-op building. What are those two things, right? Can you explain exactly what a co-op is and maybe versus what a condo is?
Yeah, so the co-op or condo community association or homeowners association, it doesn't, for our purposes, it doesn't matter what kind of organization it is. It happens that in Florida, for instance, 60% of Floridians live in some kind of HOA, whether that is a condo, but there they don't have any co-ops. They have condos or they have HOAs or community associations. In New York City, it's more common to have co-ops. 70 to 80%, depending on what statistics you look at, are co-ops in New York City. I know that they have a lot of co-ops in Chicago. In many other parts of the country, they're called condos. In Canada, they're called condos. So, but for our purposes, we want to reduce the expenses of the common elements. And in Virginia, for instance, in West Virginia, they have a lot of HOAs, and those are gated communities. We don't have, for obvious reasons, we don't have a lot of gated communities in Manhattan. But yeah, so the legal difference between them is legal, and that also depends a little bit of state, how most are commonly the rules, because there are different rules in them. But I mean, that is really set up by the condo or co-op itself. So so it's very local. But yeah, so that's basically it.
So we've got condos, co-ops, HOAs. Basically, there's a governing body that kind of covers some of the expenses, and there's some rules and regulations that everyone must follow. What are some key things to look for, right? Obviously, you're able to save your board $340,000, and there were some mistakes. We'll get into that certainly in more detail, but at a high level, if I'm looking to invest, or I'm looking to move into one of these places that has an existing co-op, condo board, or HOA, what are some key things I need to pay attention to before I sign my name on that paper?
Yeah, it's the rules. It's the board. Is the board open to you renovating, or they're not open to you renovating? What are the governing? Are you allowed to sublet? So as an investor, you want to be able to sublet, right? Some in New York City, in condos, you can generally easily sublet. You don't even have to move in. You can basically buy a condo, rent it out, and that's very common. So that's most condos. In a co-op, they have different rules, and some boards, some co-op boards, they allow sublets. Some allow sublets for decades and decades, and they have very similar to condo rules. Whereas many of the co-ops, they require you to live there for 2 years before you can sublet. And if you sublet, you need you need to apply, or your subletter needs to apply. And very often, applying to sublet an apartment can be as much work as actually putting in your application to buy an apartment. So yeah, so they don't make it, many co-ops don't make it very easy. And they also have very often rules about that you can only sublet for 2 years, every 5 years, every 10 years. So if you're an investor, you really want to look at, is this particular co-op or this building, is that even feasible for an investment standpoint?
No, it's a great point. I think some folks don't pay attention to that when they get into it, and they can get burned. But I also know that rules can change. So what about that? What happens if you're in a building where rules change? And I know there's a friend of mine who, they were looking at a building where they could rent, but I think the building could only have a certain percentage of units for rent. And if they would have tried to move out of rent at that point, it would have went over the percentage. So they actually couldn't, and it just became this whole fiasco. But how do what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and of course it can change. Now, typically, changing those types of rules has to be brought to shareholders or owners, and they have to vote on it. But I mean, you can be voted against, right? So of course it can change. And to your point, both mortgages and insurance carriers have limitation as to how much they allow to be sublet versus owned. So they tend to favor buildings that have 100% occupancy as opposed to owner occupancy. So that's both for the insurance cost or the insurance policy, as well as for mortgage whenever you refinance. Now, for condos, you can't refinance the building because the condo doesn't own the building. Where it's in a co-op, the co-op owns has the proprietary or the lease, or what is it called, the land lease, or the land, they own the land, the deed. So therefore the organization can have an underlying mortgage because they own it. And then those are proportionally divided in between the shareholders who have, through a proprietary lease, they rent their apartment from the co-op, basically.
Got it. And I think it's really good the distinction between kind of co-op and even condos, right? So in the co-op, that co-op collectively owns the entire building, right? Versus in a condo, you just own your unit. You own kind of that, square footage of space, but there's not one entity that owns the entire building. So collectively, you kind of work through common areas. So when you have, those situations, obviously you really want to understand, like you said, the rules, you understand the bylaws, you understand like who's on the board. And I've heard other folks talk about understanding kind of the cash position as well and kind of where the finances are. And obviously in your situation, you were able to come on and save $340,000 in expenses. Talk to us more about that process and how you were able to deliver on that.
Yes, and my real estate friends and I can be very happy about this. So, so what happened was that when I was an analyst on Wall Street, you analyze, so let's say that you compare buying McDonald's versus Wendy versus Burger King. It's public information. You can go to the SEC or Edgar, you download the financial statements and you compare the three. And okay, so, and you read up on it and figure out how their business model works and which one is better run and which one is not, which one is a better investment. So when we got involved after the coup, I went like, well, that's what I need to do for our building too, because now I'm looking at a financial statement in insulation. What does that mean? So, okay, so the exterminating service is $400 per week. What does that mean? So I went out, pretended to be a buyer and collected data from other buildings. And then we put together our own proprietary benchmark where we have now thousands of line items for hundreds of buildings. And we compare, so we know how much it should cost. We can find all the outliers based on our database. And so, and initially it was only like 10 buildings or so, but those 10 buildings made us realize that these are the areas that we can start saving. And then as we were learning more about the industry, we have added additional items, additional water valves that we can now install. We have learned and we have brought in an additional services or equipment or solutions to various problems. And then we roll that out to all of our clients who are interested in doing exactly the same. So we we test our own building first. So for full disclosure, I'm not on the board. You can only be one board member per apartment. So my husband is the board president and has been since we started in 2011. And I was never on the board, but they assigned me to be on the finance committee.
I love it. I love it. That's some powerful information you gave, not just for our condo association folks, but I think for every investor. And I want to play it back, right? One of the things you did was, and I love your analogy, you're investing in stocks, you're looking at investing in a fast food restaurant, you can just go and pull their filings. You can look at their reports, their financials, compare the three and decide which one you think is run the best. You took that mindset and you said, all right, let's look at our board's financials, but let's go out there and let's do some competitive shopping. Let's go out and talk to other buildings. Let's see what their financials are and let's compare. And the reason I think that's important for all of our investors is to think about it the same way. Don't just take a look at the T12, right? The trailing 12 months of operations, which is what most people do. They look at the T12 and they say, oh, okay, hey, expenses are X. But if you don't understand why they're X and what they should be, you don't have enough information to make informed decisions. So what you did was you shopped multiple properties, came back, created your own database, and said, okay, here's a benchmark now for all of these different line items based on all these properties we looked at. Now that we have a benchmark, I can look at our current operations and I can find where there's some significant delta where we can change and say, hey, we should be saving 20% on this expense. We should be saving on this, or hey, this expense is really low. I wonder why that is. So now you can really compare, and now you have a much better sense of the health and the strength of the performance. And I think for every investor, whether you're in multifamily, condos, single family houses, if you could take that approach and build your own database and have a sense of, okay, here's the benchmark of what these expenses should be. Now, whenever you're looking at the actual expenses, you will know where you can make some savings. And maybe you won't save $340,000 like Tina has, but you may be able to find some inefficiencies where you can create some real value. So that's a powerful tip, a great insight. And I appreciate you sharing that with our audience there today. Let's dig more in that space, right? Because you are a consultant for a lot of different investors, Condo Association, boards, and you also are the author of the book, Living the High Life. Talk to us more about the book and kind of the role you're playing right now with other investors to help them make some of the same savings that you were able to do for yourself and your board.
Yeah, sure. So for the longest time, I wanted to start speaking, but it was not so easy for me. So I started with podcasts. So I'm on a lot of podcasts. And because that felt like, well, I'm on Zoom all day anyway, so recording myself in the same situation, it's much easier than standing on a stage. So someone said to me, one of my coaches, I have many coaches, one of my coaches said, well, once you're ready to do a TED Talk, you might want to consider writing a book. So I put it on my calendar for April last year. April 1st, I started writing my book. I put it on my calendar for 6 weeks to block out to write it from start to finish. I failed miserably because it took me 10 weeks. I blocked out 2 hours a day to write. And so it was published a year ago, October 15th last year. And it's a guidebook for it's a guidebook for those who want to buy into a co-op or condo, or an HOA. It works for an HOA too. Some of the laws pertain to New York City, but it is a very general book. It's about how to overthrow the old board. It's how to be a better community member, how to be a better board member.
I love that you start by how to overthrow the old board and be a better community member. It's like those feel like a conflict, but overthrow the people you hate and then be nice to them. Bake them cookies afterwards.
But those 5 people you don't have to be nice to. It's the other 100 that you want to be nice to. Well, I mean, if they're doing a good job, there's no reason to overthrow anyone.
Right.
It's so, and actually the book came about also, I'm talking about, so I wrote it 1 year or 2 years after the Surfside condo collapse in Surfside, Florida. Mm-hmm. Because we often see that boards are only taking care of emergencies and we're trying to get them. So our goal when we work with our clients is to help them move forward so that they can act in a proactive way as opposed to only reacting to emergencies. That's what we try to do. We try to help them move forward and to change their mindset and give them the tools so that they can do that, so that they can focus on emergencies and we help them plan for the future and be a better board. And so with the goal in mind of being a proactive board and taking care of all the issues and upgrading and doing all the upgrades before it becomes an emergency. And then the worst case scenario is only taking care of emergencies, which was really what happened in Surfside, Florida. So, so the book starts out with that, and then it's a guidebook and it has lots of real life stories. It has my story, my husband and my story, how we started our business, but it's really a guidebook. And I send it to people all the time, and I very often, and I'm going to send you a book after the call, because I always send a book as a thank you for having me on your podcast. But we have HOA owners all over the country who has read my book.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, and I look forward to checking out the book. For anyone who else wants to check it out, it is available on Amazon. You can also go to the website, thefolsongroup.com. That's THEFOLSON group.com. And we will make sure we link to that in our show notes as well. Tina, for a lot of people, you started getting at, the building collapse in Florida. And when people think about their boards, a lot of people don't like it when they get an increase, right? And they've got to pay a higher amount. But obviously those fees are meant to go and cover some of those big ticket items and those common area items. Talk to me more about, as an investor or as an owner, what are the things we should be paying attention to when we're looking at kind of those fees or those increases and kind of the state of the actual building itself? And I don't know if they're getting inspected, or what are the things and the processes that we should be taking to make sure that the building's being taken care of, but also that we are investing the appropriate amount into these fees so that we are being proactive, or that board is being proactive to make sure we have a great community going forward?
It's a great question, John, and it's not so easy. One of the things that we say that is very often a low-hanging fruit is if you walk into if you go into an apartment building, no matter where it is in the country, if it's an apartment building, you take the elevator down to the basement. And when the doors open, if the lights are always on, then that's not a very proactive way of running a building, because basements are typically occupied 10% of the time, which means that 90% of that electricity that is not on motion sensor is a waste. And I understand that a lot of buildings, they have upgraded from T12s, those are the long old-fashioned fluorescent lights, to LED. But even if they're on LED, if they're not on motion sensors, it's a waste. So that's one good place to look. Also in basements, look around and see, is it too hot in the winter? If it's too hot, that means that the boiler is on too much and there's a lot of energy usage, energy waste. And that's not good for the building. It increases your common charges or HOA fees, and it's bad for the environment. So there are some areas. Also, when you go to the basement, you can see how tight it is. Is it very nice and clean? That means that the super or the resident manager is doing a good job at maintaining the building. Whereas if it's a big hot mess, or there's boxes everywhere and it's, you wouldn't want to walk through there unless you have to, then that might not be a very proactive board, property manager, resident manager, or super.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and appreciate you sharing that, because the basement is kind of the secret, right? I mean, it's one thing for the common areas and the walkways to be clean and look clear, but if you go into the basement, that's going to show you a lot of things that groups and ownerships aren't really looking at. So that's a really good tip, to see how the building is really operating, and then to see maybe where you could be more efficient. If I flip this and go to maybe the other end of the pendulum, I think one concern that I've heard people talk about at times is just making sure the board is being fiscally responsible. What are some measures that you can take to ensure that the board is being fiscally responsible?
It's not very easy. As an outsider, it's not easy to see. So, there's inflation, which means that they need to increase their HOA fees every year. How much do they need to increase it? Well, it depends. You would have to look at the historical data. Did they not increase it for 10 years and now all of a sudden they're increasing it by 10%? Then that seems very reasonable to me. If they have special assessments always, but there's no repairs going on, but how do you know that? So you have to read the audited financials to figure out, okay, what are they working on? In New York City, I'm sure that it's elsewhere too. There's lots of public data. You can go to the Department of Building and see what the data is. You can go to HPD, which is where people report violations that they have no heat, or they have mice, or they have bed bugs or whatever. So there are a lot of public instances or places where you can find out public information. And if there are no violations, that's a good thing. If the boiler is still running on oil and the boiler is 80 years old, that might be a larger expense. They might have plans for it. They might already have assessed enough money to do something about it, and they might actually be planning it. But as an outsider, it's not very easy to know. So there are lots of questions that, in my opinion, needs to be asked before buying an apartment.
Yeah, lots of questions there. It sounds like, again, makes sense to have someone like you on their team as you're making this decision, so they can ask the appropriate questions, maybe digging a little bit deeper on the financials and understanding exactly what is going on. For folks who are maybe looking to be an investor, I know you have a lot of New York City folks who love living in New York, maybe don't love investing in New York quite as much. What do you say to them, as far as other markets, or kind of maybe taking a similar strategy, investing, whether it be condos or any other investments outside of the New York market?
Yeah, so I mean, outside of New York, New York is expensive, but then they should call someone like you, John, because you might have better ideas of where the locations of those. So we help reduce the expenses in buildings, and who owns in the building, it doesn't matter for our purposes really. But when it comes to location, where the best investments are located, that would be my guess that I would call you.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, like it's important to understand who to call for what. And, your expertise is really in understanding those building operations, being able to reduce those fees, or at least to understand, what's going on, so that you can save and kind of protect investors and owners from that standpoint. So again, if folks want to learn more, they can check out your website and go to thefolsongroup.com. Again, we'll link to that in our show notes, and check out your book, Living the High Life, which is available on Amazon. Right now, we're going to go to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
That would be my Wall Street. It wasn't a failure per se, but it led me to something much better and much more rewarding that I'm much more passionate about. And I shared my story before, so I don't have to share it again. But I was in an industry where every single person on New York City's corner were all financial advisors. And now we are, to our knowledge, the only consultant that specializes in co-ops and condos that takes a holistic approach on helping boards and co-op and condo owners live in an environment that's safer, more sustainable, and more affordable.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Digital resource for my business, meaning
like an app or any website or something that you use that really makes your life a little bit easier?
Spreadsheets.
Okay.
Spreadsheets and Asana.
All right, excellent. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Living the High Life.
Besides your own, of course. Naturally,
I have gifted that with the most. Yeah. The book that really changed my networking and how I did things and how I thought about building relationships and stuff was Never Eat Alone.
Great book. Never Eat Alone. Love it. All right. Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
I write my 3 business tasks the night before, and then I stick to it like there's no tomorrow.
All right. Give me your number 1 insight for, and I'm going to say, optimizing your board.
My number 1 insight for optimizing the board is that their board members are volunteers, but they have a job. And in their professional life, they use Asana, Excel, they use Google, they use calendars, they use all of these different tools, they use AI, they use all of these tools, and they run things very, very efficiently, either because that's how they've been told, or they're business owners and that's how they've learned that this is how it needs to be done to be effective and efficient. Then they go sit on the board and they do not use any of those tools. We very often say to them, we say, do you have a OneDrive or a Google Drive or something where you save all of your documents? And they said, oh no, the property manager has our documents. Well, that's not a good way to do it. You need to have your documents. And they said, oh, we can do that? Absolutely, you can do that. And very often they say, oh, our board meetings, our monthly board meetings go on for 3 hours. Who has time for that? No, you need to write an agenda, stick to it, get it done, and don't table anything. This is when we're making decisions. It needs to be run like a business.
Love it. Great insight right there. All right, you are in New York. Let's lighten the mood. And in Manhattan, to be more specific, give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
The Boathouse in Central Park.
Okay.
Yes.
What do you love there?
Have you ever been? Oh,
I have not, but it's on the list now.
Okay. They have an excellent crab cake lunch salad that is fantastic. Their food overall is very good. And as you know, it's wasn't it in Sex and the City that they went to the Boathouse?
I don't know. I didn't watch it. But
okay.
Sounds good to me. Yes. Well, the Boathouse sounds like an excellent option. Tina, you gave us some great insights today. I really appreciate you sharing so much on your background, being able to, overthrow your board and take over and being able to save over $340,000 and helping other people do the same, right? You mentioned that stat that 25% of New Yorkers are living in a co-op or a condo building. So being able to save on those board fees is tremendous, and being just more efficient and effective. We talked a little about your book, Living the High Life. And if folks want to learn more, they can go to the Folson Group, THEFOLSON group.com. They can check out all that great information there. And I particularly love the insight you gave on how you're able to do that, and something that is applicable for all investors, which is start to develop your own database, get some benchmarks. So when you're looking at financials, you have your own benchmarks to compare it to, so you can identify where there's opportunities for optimization, as opposed to just taking that T12 or that financial information on its own. So really powerful insight that I hope a lot of our listeners are able to apply into their own business moving forward. Again, Tina, great having you on the show today. I look forward to staying connected with you, and hope you have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much, John.